The religious views of George Washington have long been debated. While some of the founding fathers, such as Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Patrick Henry, were noted for writing about religion, Washington rarely discussed his religious and philosophical views. His personal letters and public speeches sometimes referred to Providence. He was a member of several churches which he attended, and served as an Anglican vestryman and warden for more than 15 years when Virginia had an established church. Anglican affiliations. George Washington was baptized in infancy into the Church of England, which, until 1776, was the established Church of Virginia. As the British monarch is supreme governor of the Church of England, and its clergy swear an oath of supremacy to the monarch. The American churches established the Episcopal Church after the American Revolution. The Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom disestablished the church, although it retained some lands which had been purchased with public monies. As an adult, Washington served as a member of the vestry for his local parish, office holding qualifications at all levels, including the House of Burgesses, to which Washington was elected in 1758, required affiliation with the current state religion and an undertaking that one would neither express dissent nor do anything that did not conform to church doctrine. At the Library of the New York Historical Society, some manuscripts containing a leaf from the church record of Powys were available to Benson Lossing, an American historian, which he included in his Field Book of the Revolution. The leaf contained the following signed oath, required to qualify individuals as vestrymen. I, A.B., do declare that I will be conformable to the doctrine and discipline of the Church of England, as by law established. 1765. May 20. Thomas Withers Coffer, Thomas Ford, John Ford. The 19th of August, Geo. Washington, Daniel McCarty. Washington served as a vestryman or warden for more than 15 years. The vestry in Virginia was the governing body of each church. Attendance at religious services. Washington paid for pews at several churches. Rev. Lee Massey, his pastor, wrote, "I never knew so constant an attendant in church as Washington." However, Washington's personal diaries indicate that he did not regularly attend services while home at Mount Vernon, spending most Sundays writing letters, conducting business, fox hunting, or doing other activities. Biographer Paul Lester Ford wrote, "His daily, where and how my time is spent, tells how often he attended church, and in the year 1760 he went 16 times, and in 1768 he went 14. While he was at Mount Vernon, his first parish was Powys Church, 7 miles from Mount Vernon. His second parish in Alexandria was 9 miles away. When traveling, particularly on political business, he was more likely to attend church services. In the 7 Sundays during the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia, he went to church on 3, attending Anglican, Quaker, and Catholic services. During his tours of the nation in his 2 terms as president, he attended religious services in each city, sometimes as frequently as 3 services in a day. Communion. In 1915, the great-grandson of Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton reported that when he was 7 years old and she was 97 years old, she said, "If anyone ever tells you that George Washington was not a communicant in the church, you say that your great-grandmother told you to say that she had knelt at this chancel rail at his side and received with him the Holy Communion." The record of his taking communion was spotty. Ministers at 4 of the churches Washington often attended wrote that he regularly left services before communion. When Rev. Dr. James Abercrombie, rector of St. Peter's Episcopal Church, in Philadelphia, mentioned in a weekly sermon that those in elevated stations set an unhappy example by leaving at communion, Washington completely stopped attending that church on Communion Sundays. Long after Washington died, when asked about Washington's beliefs, Abercrombie replied, Sir Washington was a dice. Nonetheless, it was also not uncommon in those days for churchgoers to pass on participating in communion. Lack of frequency in reception of communion was not unusual in that period. In 1905, Pope Pius X, in Sacra Tridentina Synodis, exhorted Catholics to receive communion frequently, even daily. Although Christ instituted the rite at the Last Supper, the frequency with which Christians should receive it varies in different denominations. Alleged baptism. An article in Time magazine for September 5, 1932, suggested that Washington had been baptized by the Baptist chaplain to the Continental Army John Garneau at Valley Forge. Washington biographer Rupert Hughes determined that Rev. Garneau served with Clinton's army, not with Washington's, that the location is sometimes given as Valley Forge and sometimes as the Potomac, that there is no documentation of Garneau ever being at Valley Forge, that there is nothing in Garneau's own correspondence or his biography to suggest that the event took place, and that none of the 42 reputed witnesses ever documented the event. In William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri, there is a painting of Garneau baptizing Washington. The school takes no stance on whether the baptism of Washington actually took place. Death and burial. On his deathbed, Washington did not summon a minister or priest. After his death, he was buried according to the rite of the Episcopal Church, with the Rev. Thomas Davis, rector of Christ Church, Alexandria, officiating. Masonic rites were also performed by members of his lodge. Public writings and speeches. Washington used the word God 146 times in his personal and public writings, many of which were in his public speeches, and while some were regularly used phrases such as, "Thank God, God knows, for God's sake," or, "My God." There are many other examples where Washington used thoughtful expressions about God and his providence. Throughout his life, Washington spoke of the value of righteousness, and of seeking and offering thanks for the blessings of heaven. Washington often spoke of providence. Philosopher Michael Novak writes that Anglican laymen of that period rarely invoked the name of Jesus. The most famous reference came in a 1779 letter to a delegation of Native Americans. The letter was in the handwriting of an aide, and some biographers, including Chernev, Enriques and Freeman, say that the aide wrote it, not Washington. You do well to wish to learn our arts and ways of life, and above all, the religion of Jesus Christ. These will make you a greater and happier people than you are. Congress will do everything they can to assist you in this wise intention, and to tie the knot of friendship and union so fast that nothing shall ever be able to loose it. When Congress authorized a day of fasting in 1778, Washington told his soldiers, "The Honorable Congress having thought proper to recommend to the United States of America to set apart Wednesday the 22nd instant to be observed as a day of fasting, humiliation and prayer, that at one time and with one voice the righteous dispensations of Providence may be acknowledged, and his goodness and mercy toward us and our alms supplicated and implored. The General directs that this day also shall be religiously observed in the army, that no work be done thereon, and that the chaplains prepare discourses suitable to the occasion." Washington believed in the importance of religion for Republican government. His 1796 farewell address, written by Alexander Hamilton and revised by himself, said that it was unrealistic to expect that a whole nation, whatever might be said of minds of peculiar structure, could long be moral without religion, that national morality is necessary for good government, and that politicians should cherish religion's support of national morality. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and to cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths, which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. It is substantially true that virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. The rule, indeed, extends with more or less force to every species of free government. Who, that is a sincere friend to it, can look with indifference upon attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric? Washington rejected an additional sentence, also written by Alexander Hamilton, with a stronger sentiment. Does it, national morality, not require the aid of a generally received and divinely authoritative religion? For decades, Washington was credited with starting the tradition of adding the words, "So help me, God," to the presidential inaugural oath. Although experts at the Library of Congress, the U.S. Senate Historical Office, and Mount Vernon have said there is no evidence to support that claim, none of the detailed contemporaneous eyewitness accounts of the first inauguration mentioned that Washington had used that expression, and it is not part of the text of the inaugural oath prescribed by the Constitution. The first authors to state that Washington added the words were Rufus Wilmot Griswold in 1854 and Washington Irving in 1857. In his first inaugural address, Washington stressed his belief that the new nation was under the special agency of Providence. Washington made several statements as general of the Army which mentioned religion. Sparks quotes orders given by General Washington to his army requiring them to attend to their religious duties and to implore the blessing of heaven upon the American army. Early in his presidency, at the request of Congress, he issued the first National Thanksgiving Proclamation on October 3, 1789. The proclamation was sent to the governors of the states, and assigns the day upon which the people of these states devote themselves in service to that great and glorious being who is the beneficent author of all the good that was, that is, or that will be. It urges the people in the young country to express their gratitude to God for his protection of them through the Revolutionary War and the peace they had experienced since, for allowing the Constitution to be composed in a peaceable and rational manner, for the civil and religious liberty they possess, and, in general, for all the great and various favors which he has been pleased to confer upon us. The proclamation also states that it is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey his will, to be grateful for his benefits, and humbly to implore his protection and favor. It ends by calling the people of the United States to prayer and to beseech God to pardon our national and other transgressions, to allow the national government to be wise and just, to protect and guide all nations, to promote, through religion and virtue, and the increase of science, and to grant unto all mankind such a degree of temporal prosperity as he alone knows to be best. Private writings. In his letters to young people, particularly to his adopted children, Washington urged upon them truth, character, honesty, but said little or nothing related to specific items of religious practice. Analysts who have studied Washington's papers held by the Library of Congress say that his correspondence with Masonic lodges is filled with references to the great architect of the universe. Prayers said to have been composed by him in his later life are highly edited. An unfinished book of Christian prayers attributed to him by a collector was rejected by Worthington C. Ford, editor of an edition of Washington's papers, and the Smithsonian Institution for lack of authenticity. Comparisons to documents Washington wrote show that it is not in his handwriting. In a letter to George Mason in 1785, he wrote that he was not among those alarmed by a bill making people pay towards the support of that religion which they profess. but felt that it was impolitic to pass such a measure, and wished it had never been proposed, believing that it would disturb public tranquility. Support of religious toleration. Washington held that all religions, and nearly all religious practices, were beneficial to humans. On some occasions, such as during the Constitutional Convention, he attended Presbyterian, Catholic, and Friends Sunday services. Washington was an early supporter of religious toleration and freedom of religion. In 1775, he ordered that his troops not show anti-Catholic sentiments by burning the Pope in effigy on Guy Fawkes Night. When hiring workmen for Mount Vernon, he wrote to his agent, "If they be good workmen, they may be from Asia, Africa, or Europe, they may be Mohammedans, Muslims, Jews, or Christians of any sect, or they may be atheists." In 1790, Washington expressed his support for religious tolerance where in a letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island he stated, "May the children of the stock of Abraham, who dwell in this land, continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while every one shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." Washington was an officer in the Freemasons, an organization which, at the time Washington lived, required that its members will never be a stupid atheist nor an irreligious libertine, which meant that they should believe in God, regardless of other religious convictions or affiliations. Some biographers hold the opinion that many of the American founding fathers believed that, as leaders of the nation, they should remain silent on questions of doctrine and denomination, to avoid creating unnecessary divisiveness within the nation. Instead, they should promote the virtues taught by religion in general. Eyewitness accounts. Eyewitness accounts exist of Washington engaging in morning devotions. Jared Sparks recorded the following account from Washington's nephew George W. Lewis. Mr. Lewis said he had accidentally witnessed Washington's private devotions in his library both morning and evening, that on those occasions he had seen him in a kneeling position with a Bible open before him and that he believed such to have been his daily practice. Sparks also reports that Washington's adopted daughter, Nellie Custis Lewis, in response to his request for information on Washington's religion's views, wrote, he attended the church at Alexandria when the weather and roads permitted a ride of 10 miles. In New York and Philadelphia he never omitted attendance at church in the morning, unless detained by indisposition, sickness. She continued by saying, "No one in church attended to the services with more reverential respect." She added, "I should have thought it the greatest heresy to doubt his firm belief in Christianity." His life, his writings, prove that he was a Christian. He was not one of those who act or pray, that they may be seen of men. In closing, Nellie attempted to answer the question of whether General Washington was a Christian. She responded, "Is it necessary that anyone should certify? General Washington avowed himself to be a believer in Christianity. As well may we question his patriotism, his heroic, disinterested devotion to his country. His mottos were, 'Deeds, not words,' and 'For God and my country.'" During the Revolutionary War, General Robert Porterfield stated he found him on his knees, engaged in his morning's devotions. Alexander Hamilton corroborated Porterfield's account, stating, "Such was his most constant habit." A French citizen who knew Washington well during the Revolutionary War and the presidency stated, "Every day of the year, he rises at 5 in the morning. As soon as he is up, he dresses, then prays reverently to God." Indeed, Washington had purchased a prayer book with the new version of Psalms in good plain type a few years before the Revolutionary War. On February 1, 1800, a few weeks after Washington's death, Thomas Jefferson made the following entry in his journal, regarding an incident on the occasion of Washington's departure from office. Dr. Rush tells me that he had it from Asher Green that where the clergy addressed Gen. Washington on his departure from the government. It was observed in their consultation that he had never on any occasion said a word to the public which showed a belief in the XN religion, and they thought they should so pen their address as to force him at length to declare publicly whether he was a Christian or not. They did so. However, he observed the old fox was too cunning for them. He answered every article of their address, particularly except that which he passed over without notice. Rush observes he never did say a word on the subject in any of his public papers except in his valedictory letter to the governors of the states when he resigned his commission in the army, wherein he speaks of the benign influence of the Christian religion. I know that Governor Morris, who pretended to be in his secrets and believed himself to be so, has often told me that Gen. Washington believed no more of that system than he himself did. In the 1840s, abolitionist newspapers printed interviews with and testimony of Oney Judge, a slave who escaped from the Washingtons in 1796. One such article, from the Granite Freeman, stated, "She never heard Washington pray, and does not believe that he was accustomed to. Mrs. Washington used to read prayers, but I don't call that praying." In another case, the Rev. Benjamin Chase, in a letter to the Liberator, wrote that, "She says that the stories told of Washington's piety and prayers, so far as she ever saw or heard while she was his slave, have no foundation."